Mike the Science Guy. Science rules. Mike the Science Guy.
Hello everyone, my name is Mike Boheven and thanks for tuning into my tutorial on how to safely operate a glove box, a Schlenk line, as well as some other important techniques when you're using the Schlenk line. So today I'm going to cover how to safely operate a glove box, safely turning on and off the Schlenk line, degassing a solvent, inertly cannula transferring a solvent from one flask to another, as well as using the Schlenk filter. So as always, safety is our #1 priority, so always remember to wear goggles, a lab coat, and gloves. Always know the hazards of the chemicals you are using and know where they should be going in terms of their respective waste bins, whether it be reducing, oxidizing, organic, or solid waste. And when you're working with needles, always cap the needle when it's not used. Sharp objects are never good laying around. And as always, take your time. If you have any questions or any doubts about what you're doing, ask your peers or your TA. It's always better to be safe than sorry. And for your convenience, I have created chapter markers and put them on the bottom right, so you should be able to quickly navigate to the technique you are looking for instruction on. And as always, thank you for tuning into my tutorial. Remember to stay safe and enjoy.
Alright, sweet. So today we're going to illustrate some glove box techniques. So first, put your fingers in the finger slots. And then as you increase the pressure in the glove box, you want to hit the left vacuum pump, which takes the air that you're pushing with your hands as you try to bring it in out of the glove box, so it makes enough room for your hands. And you always want to try and keep the pressure in between the two, what are those, orange things. Slowly but surely we'll get there. It's always a good idea to keep an eye on the gauges too, even though that there's like an automatic function if it goes too far in one way, but it's not a good thing to rely on that stuff. Just take a few minutes to get in there.
$2,000 years later.
Now when your hands start getting in there, you can start trying to get the your fingers in the glove, which has always proved to be a little difficult for me. Get there. Ugh. Once I find my thumb holes, get there. It's good to have a lot of patience when you're working with the glove box, so don't lose your mind. All right. So, always being mindful of the gauge, we want to tear the scale and wipe it off as well. I'll pretend like there's a brush here to wipe it off. And then get a piece of whey paper. You get a piece of whey paper, and I like to fold it in half just so we don't lose anything. Put it on the scale. Tear it. When I tear it, I always like to try and stay as still as possible so I don't change the reading as much. But then take your spatula, clean it off, and then get some material in my imaginary vial, weigh it out, being careful not to change the pressure because you're trying to get how much weight is in there. And then we clean the spatula off. Wipe. Take our product, put it in a Schlenk flask that would be right over here. Grease the Schlenk flask and then close it. And then we're on our way out. And you want to hit as you're going out, you want to hit the right control on the glove box, which will increase the pressure inside the glove box, allowing your hands to come out easily without any major pressure differences. And then, once your hands are out, you're going to want to move the product into the antechamber, which Zane will do always. Yep. That's how you use the glove box. Now I'm going to show you guys how to turn on the Schlenk line. So the first thing I like to do is just get some liquid nitrogen from the dewar. Liquid nitrogen is really cold. It's like negative 300 degrees Celsius, so be pretty careful. Make sure there's no one around you. Just be safe. Just be safe with the really cold liquid gas. You want to fill it up to around halfway. It's hard to see the inside because everything's gas, but you kind of go through the sound. Gas back on the dewar. Alright, so I'm just going to leave this here for a minute. And then we're going to turn on the pump. There's a little red or black button on the top back of it. Then we want to make sure that our gas line is open and the vacuum is closed. So we're pulling air from here right now. We're gonna close this. So now the vacuum's pulling a vacuum on the Schlenk line. And then we are able to open it up. Find 5 or 6 twists. You generally see there's a little gap right there. And then you want to put your liquid nitrogen dewar on the cold trap, but you want to do so quite slowly because the nitrogen will boil very fast and then it can spill on your hands. And a little nitrogen it'll feel cold, but a big splash will probably freeze the skin, the hair right off your skin. It's never fun. Once you get it up to a good, get it up to a good level, it's always nice to just be careful. All right, try to raise it up as high as you can. All right, and at this point, we want to be mindful that everything's closed to air. We don't want to be condensing oxygen because that's a pretty bad explosive hazard. So now we're going to go over to the oven and get the Schlenk flask. Gloves because safety first. You don't want to burn your hands. Now open the oven. We're going to grab a Schlenk flask and a stopper. Then we're going to come over here, grab a spring, the spring stopper. Take it over. So you want to be careful when you're doing this because the glass that you just took out of the oven is like really hot. It's like almost hotter than boiling water. So what you're going to want to do is now grease up the Schlenk flask. A little dabble do ya, I like to say. And be careful because the glass is hot. Just give it a few spins like that. Get the grease off. And now is the more difficult part of putting the spring on. Just like that. And then it seems like I forgot to set them, so let's go grab it. Got 2 sides. Then, before you put the Schlenk flask on the line, you always want to make sure you have a septum on there. These are a little bit of a pain in the ass to get on there, but oh god. Yeah, once it gets on there, you might get a little frustrated, but good. Then you're going to want to put it on the clamp, secure it. 10 minutes later, after you close the clamp, Alright, we're going to want to take the line here that's connected to the Schlenk line, make sure it's off, and we want to make a nice snug fit. A lot of the times these tubes won't be able to go over it, so we could use a heat gun if necessary, but it doesn't seem necessary at this point. So you have to purge the line. So we're going to make sure that this is closed and this is closed. And then we have down, the little blue paint dot down is going to pull the vacuum. But before we do that, we want to turn the nitrogen on. We want to do that so there's a good steady flow on the bubbler. This right here would probably be a little bit too much, and this would probably be a little too little. So in the middle, something like that, it's perfect. So now that we have nitrogen flowing through our Schlenk line, if we open it, if we put blue down, that's going to pull a vacuum. So we want to purge the oxygen or the air out of here first. And then when we put it back with nitrogen, we want to make sure that the pressure isn't too negative, meaning that the mineral oil doesn't squirt back up here and then gets everything dirty. So just monitor that, be careful. And you want to do that generally between about three times. Another thing I find just to help with the blowback is if you turn the nitrogen pressure on a little bit higher and then you do it, there's less of a blowback. So that's something to consider too. And then the third time, the vacuum step takes it's a lot shorter than the nitrogen step. So then once we do that, we can open it up to, it doesn't really matter which one you do first. And then do the same, repeat the same process about 3 times. But this time you want to be a little bit more careful and have a lot of control over the nitrogen when you're putting it back in. So that doesn't happen. You just want to slowly do it. Yep. So do that another 2 times. Sometimes if you just go really fast over it, cycle over it, it'll make it a little bit easier. And yeah, that's another reason why the bubbler is down here too. So if you do have mineral oil bubble, it's not going to come all the way back up. So it'll be able to come back down. And now our Schlenk flask and whatever contents were inside of this are now exposed to inert atmosphere, which is nitrogen, and we're all set. Okay. All right, welcome back to part 2 of Mike's how to use a Schlenk line tutorial. So now we're gonna degas a solvent. So this solvent is just, we'll call it acetone. So what we want to do is, acetone's not air sensitive, so it doesn't matter if it touches air first. So I like to put in a vent needle first, get that out of the way. And then we set this needle, you want to make sure that it's running positive nitrogen pressure. You can do that by putting it close to your hand. Obviously, don't stab yourself with the needle. Chemistry lab. It's bad. But yeah, so these needles are very thin, so it might take a little bit of practice to get it in there. But once it's in there and you have the nitrogen pressure on, you should start to see some bubbles. Sometimes you just might need to bend the needle the position you want it to be in. And once we have the needle in the solvent, it's starting to gas, so very nice. You can see that a little bit better here. The nitrogen is coming through the needle, going into the solution, pushing out any oxygen that could have been dissolved in the solution or in the airspace out from the vent needle. So that's how we do that. Nextly, what we're going to want to do is transfer some of this solvent into this flask here that we have some of my N-heterocyclic carbene material crystal stuff that we're just going to say that's what it is. But the procedure says we need to Canula transfer some toluene into the flask under inert conditions So in order to do that, we need to make sure that this is purged first. So we have to check our nitrogen flow, make sure it's not too high, and then purge the line first. And then bring it back to nitrogen. And then we could do that assuming that it's been done a bunch of times. 3 times is the limit, or minimum you should do it. And just do the same thing for the flask too. And then you're gonna want to watch the pressure here, make sure the mineral oil doesn't spit back up too much. All right, so now I'm going to show you guys how we're going to inertly transfer some toluene, which is going to be here, it's degassing right now, into the NHC crystal material. So first we want to make sure that it's under positive nitrogen pressure here. And this is assuming that we have purged everything from oxygen. So I like to use the smaller needles first because we're under positive nitrogen pressure. So nitrogen is just going to be coming out of the needle as opposed to any air going into it. And then what we're going to need to do is go and get a cannula. So we have to go to and get a cannula, and always wear your gloves. Safety is the #1 priority. You do not want to get burned, not in chem lab. And then by the time you bring it over to your hood, the metal should have cooled sufficiently enough to not be hot to the touch. So what I usually do is I like to put the cannula first into the flask that we're going to be taking solvent from, or the donor flask. Sometimes a lot of needles be a pain in the ass, and then since we're already under positive nitrogen pressure, we don't need this vent needle anymore. So we take that out and immediately cap it. Sharp things are dangerous. So now we have positive nitrogen pressure on the solvent bottle, in this case which is toluene, and we're trying to transfer it up to this Schlenk flask. So usually a good way to do that is you want the solvent to be higher, so it's easier, it's transferred more easily. So I'm gonna do that.
Hey guys, well the lab version of me is working on raising the solvent flask up. I wanted to point out that it would have been much safer to put the cannula in after you raise the flask, just so you don't have an open end, a sharp needle point moving around while you're trying to work.
So now we can see that the solution is still being purged, meaning that there's a positive nitrogen flow. And the cannula has been purged with nitrogen as well. So without lowering the cannula into the solution, I put it into the receiving flask. Make sure that it's nice and snug. Then that's when I begin to submerge the cannula from the donor flask. Sometimes you also have to bend it because metal is easily bent, so it's not a problem. So once we have the cannula on the donor flask underneath the water level, we can begin to manipulate the pressure to try and get the solution from the donor flask into the receiving flask. So if manipulating the pressure doesn't work at first, well, there we go. So it did work, and we have a little bit of transfer going on. And the cannula transfer is qualitative as opposed to quantitative because you can't really measure out an exact amount. But in this case, for my procedure, about 30 milliliters is needed. So once we get there, we could also manipulate the flow a little bit too. It's starting to go, but so we just let the solution transfer. If we want to increase the flow rate, we could turn the nitrogen up a little bit. Not too much, but that'll change the pressure, pushing more solvent into the flask. There we go. Very sensitive. But that seems to be for the sake of demonstration enough. So once we have a desired level, I take the cannula out of the solution. So only nitrogen now is being transferred, and whatever was in the cannula is now being pushed through. And then I take the cannula right out of the receiving flask. And because there is positive nitrogen pressure and a vent needle, we can expect that no oxygen or atmospheric air got in other than what's being pushed through. So now I'm going to demonstrate how to do a Schlenk filter. So a Schlenk filter is an inert way to separate solids from solution under inert atmospheric conditions. So the first thing we're going to want to do is make sure that this flask is under positive nitrogen flow. So meaning when we take the septum off in order to put the Schlenk flask on, that there's no transfer of any atmospheric air. So first what we're going to want to do is make sure that this is thoroughly greased. Grease is very important in making sure that nothing gets through the joint. Grease it up like that. And always take your vent needle out with the vent needle cap. So now we're under positive nitrogen pressure and the pressure is building. So more slowly. And in one quick motion, because you are under positive nitrogen pressure, it'll be a little bit easier. Just take it out. And twist it to grease it in. And then we always, because we will be flipping this, we do want to put a K-clip to secure it. So as of right now, we have nitrogen coming down in through the bottom and up through the top. Now that we have the K-clip on the bottom here, we just want to make sure that that there is positive nitrogen flow going down the bottom and that there is no oxygen going out here. The way to do that is just you can kind of feel a little bit of a draft, kind of like a nice spring breeze. But you're going to want to take the other Schlenk flask, your receiving Schlenk flask, and you're going to want to make sure it's under positive nitrogen pressure as well. So we're going to put it under positive nitrogen pressure. And whenever we put something under positive nitrogen pressure, it's a good idea, just give it a vent needle so there's no explosions or pressure that it can't handle. So making sure everything is secure, I'm going to actually remove it from the nitrogen. Because this is an empty flask, there should be nothing inside of it. So for this, and we're going to want to close it too, so there's only nitrogen left in here. Take the vent needle out as well. And this is actually going to go right on the top of here. So what we have to do is grease it again. Grease the top part. And it's okay if you don't get the back side. You could always twist the joint around, get the grease on the back. So now that we have positive nitrogen pressure, we want to make sure this is open so that when we put it on, the nitrogen flows up and out the arm. So we do that quickly. Once again, you'll want to take this out quickly, and then just ever so quickly and carefully. And this is what I was talking about, to spin it around to get the grease. And then we're going to want to close it and put the K-clip on. So at this point we have positive nitrogen pressure flowing all the way through the top. We want to let it out. Like that. So now this is when we do the flip, which is probably the most nerve-wracking part of this whole process, because you have to flip this whole thing under positive nitrogen pressure. So before I flip it, I'm going to actually turn it off to nitrogen on both sides, just so there's no difference in pressure when we're flipping it, and nothing gets pushed in a way we don't want it to get pushed. So very carefully, we're going to make sure all the K-clips are on, everything's secure, and then very carefully, we're gonna flip it. And after we flip it, it's a really good idea to clamp it. You always want to clamp it. So now we're under positive nitrogen pressure, and if we want to actually increase the flow just a little bit, not too much, just a little bit. When we open the bottom, we're able to push nitrogen through and continue to have a positive pressure with the nitrogen going down and out through the bottom. And like you can see here, there was a little bit of solvent that got into the tube here, and that could have been easily avoided if I just flipped it so the liquid ran down the opposite side as opposed to where the neck was. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But that's how you do a Schlenk filter. It's quite complicated. It's a lot of steps, but in the end, it gets you what you want. So, all right, now I'm going to show you guys how to turn off the Schlenk line. So this is assuming that everything is all set and ready to go. So I don't know, this kind of makes me uncomfortable when it's like that on the top. So just be careful. Make sure this is tight. So you got a lot of different glass pieces on each other, but you're gonna want to make sure everything is turned off to the nitrogen. Actually, it doesn't matter what side the blue's on, both of them, the left and right position is off. So we want to then close this little top part, and you can see it's closed. I don't know, there's like a little tiny gap right there, and when that first ring is below it, you're all set. So at this point, there is a vacuum being pulled from the whole thing is a vacuum, and at this point, take off cold trap. So be careful here again, because liquid nitrogen is extremely cold. Slowly take the doer off. I like to put it aside first and just check to make sure that there's no volatile. Mainly you want to check and make sure this doesn't look blue, because blue is bad. You definitely want to leave if you see blue. Then we turn off the vacuum. And now the top parts here, if we loosen each wing nut, we could slide it out. And then we loosen each wing nut carefully. And this is very cold too, so it might be actually even better to wear a glove. Carefully remove cold trap, and the O-ring tends to fall just like that. Okay. At this point, you want to check, make sure there's nothing bad in here. Looks like it's just nitrogen gas and just condensing air. So we would, if there is anything in this condensed, we would bring it over to the waste and pour it in its respective waste bin. But and before you do take the cold trap off, you want to make sure that this is open to air, so you're actually able to take it out, and there's no actual vacuum fighting you on the way to it. But then the nitrogen, we're able to return to the doer. And the doer is over here. Carefully pour the liquid nitrogen, liquid gas back in the doer. And that's it. And that's how you do it.